All right. So again, thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Tommy Ferguson. I'm with Capital City Village. For those of you not aware of what we do, Capital City Village is a local nonprofit that helps Austin seniors age in place, to age well in their own homes through a mix of volunteer services as well as engaging programs like this one to keep people informed and socially connected. So this program, I'm very glad you could join us today and really do appreciate your time. This is our own board member, Dr. Tom McHorse, and he's going to present a summary, some reflections, and also a Q&A on the book Being Mortal. And that book is really critical. It's a great book by Dr. Atul Gawande. It is considered very riveting, honest, and humane. It shows that the ultimate goal is not a good death, but a good life, all the way to the very end. And it really does dig in deep to some of our ways of dealing with end-of-life issues and even with care in the third age, so to speak. So again, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to turn things over very quickly to Tom. We also will be doing some screen share. So we'll have a couple of slides to present, and I'll just let Tom call the shots on that, and then I'll bring those up as we go. So without further ado, Tom, I'm going to mute myself and turn things over to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Program committee asked us to revisit this. About 3 years ago, we reviewed the book in a more formal way, but this is more of a discussion and emphasis. Those of you familiar with the book, it was published actually in 2014. Dr. Gawande, why don't you go ahead and throw up the first slide, please, PowerPoint, please, Tommy. Dr. Gawande was then a practicing general surgeon in Boston. So he was, as we like to say in the business, a real doctor. But he had been writing, actually, he had written other medical articles. So this was not his first visit into the world of writing, and has developed quite a reputation. He's now almost more of a medical administrator because he's gotten into healthcare systems and improving them in addition to this. A little bit of background, he is American born, American trained, but his father practiced urology in a small Ohio town for 30 or 40 years and is featured prominently towards the end of the book. But his father was born in India, trained there mostly except for his residency, and then settled in Ohio. So he brings the author, Atul Gawande, brings kind of a cross-cultural background into this, although he truly emphasizes his experiences and, more important, in the medical system. As the screen share shows, this is his version of a meditation on how people can better live with age-related frailty, serious illness, and approaching death. And whether you're before age-related frailty or approaching death, all of these are reality. Those of you who know me get tired of me saying, but one of my former medical school roommates used to say that living is dangerous to your health. And so I think we have to start out with that. Let's go on to no, stay where you are, sorry. Actually, let's get rid of that and just come back to me only. The purpose of the book is to help us understand, and more importantly, I think from his perspective, to help us really deal with some of the questions, and we'll do into that. We have helpers. Those of you who are seeing my companion in the background is my daughter-in-law, Beth, who will kick in a little bit. She's from the world of nursing. Kay is hiding out on the other side. But at this point, his premise is, and I'm going to read directly from it, and see if you reflect a moment, we'll take a moment to reflect if you think that this is a true statement. Modern scientific capability has profoundly altered the course of human life, i.e., we live about twice as long as we did 150 years ago. People live longer and better than in any other time in history. But scientific advances have turned the process of aging and dying into medical experiences, matters to be managed by healthcare professionals. And then his own indictment, and we in the medical world have proved alarmingly unprepared for it. Now, we think we're pretty good at the doctor business, and most of you are aware that I'm a mostly retired gastroenterologist, so I'm not unbiased in this discussion as we go forward. But his whole point is medicine takes a really good care of us until we get to the stage of frailty. That is, need assisted services to get our way through life, become dependent. And that's where he thinks that modern medicine breaks down considerably. The assumption I've read, briefly, the book is made up of sections, first describing aging and increasing disability. He makes the point, tells the story of his mother-in-law, who lived alone until her 80s, and then, as we'll talk a little later, increasing instability, and an event happened that made her realize that she could no longer live independently. He also interviews a geriatric specialist. And if you don't mind raising your hand, have any of you ever been to a geriatric specialist as opposed to your family doctor or your internist? Good, good. Glad you have. That's somebody, and after doing an internal medicine or similar residency, then takes another additional year dealing with the diseases specifically to older Americans. Which word do you like? You like older Americans, senior citizens, old fogies? You tell me which word that I should use throughout this presentation. But he does it, and I think one of the points that I got from reading this interview is the geriatric physician makes the point two things. One, that when you, as a senior citizen, go to the doctor, you really need to pick out your one or two major complaints. In other words, what do you want? What one thing would you like to be better, or two or three or six things? But the point is, focus on things. And then a good geriatric physician really is interested in your independence. In other words, what things are you doing independently? The criteria for being independent here we go. Sorry. The criterion for being independent: if you cannot shop for yourself, prepare your own food, maintain your housekeeping, do your laundry, manage your medications, make phone calls, travel on your own, and handle finances, these are the things that are the 8 independent activities of daily living. If you're not able to do all 8 of those, the experts would suggest that it's appropriate that you have some assistance in your daily living. The options for aging, as people get older, of course, depends on your finances, to be blunt about it, but it also the culture that you're in. Dr. Gawande illustrates that his grandfather, who was still alive in India and actually lived to be 106, but long before he turned 106, he was still doing things. At 104, he was still riding his horse with assistance, I think. But the whole point being, a multi-generational family was there to support him. Think how many multi-generational families you can think of that would be able to, that are 3-4 generations that are either living together or living in such a way that they could be supportive to you as you get older. I don't think, Mega, did you ever come on, or Subita? These are some folks from us.
Yeah, Mega has joined us.
Oh, good. But you might comment, do you think he's realistic that the Indian family in India still is capable of supporting in a multi-generational way their aging parents? And does that apply in the US?
It looks like her mic is not working. So
anyway, we
in and out,
but we're delighted that both Subita and Mega are part of Save Us, and South Asian Volunteer Association, which is essentially immigrants from India and other areas that have come to the US to live, in most cases, with their children. Okay, but multi-generational. maybe a president in the US 40 or 50 years ago. Anybody willing to raise their hand and say, I have the great opportunity to live in a multi-generational family and be supported by that? Because I can't see everybody, but I don't see any overwhelming. Okay.
Well, Tom, sorry, this is Tommy. I will say that we did for a time have a multi-generational household when my daughter, who is now 15, was an infant and toddler. My mother, who was around 70 at that time, came to live with us. So we had a 70-year-old, a year and a half old, a teenager, and then two parents, two adults in the household, and it was lively. So, and Mega, I think, is unmuted now, so she can maybe chime in as well.
Does the multi-generational supportive family exist still in India, or its manifestation in U.S. immigrants or U.S. residents? Megan? Yes, it does, she said very strongly. In both places, I think, is the answer. What happens if you don't have that? Suppose that you're no longer capable of independent living. Where would you go? Would you go to an in-house caregiver? Peter, how easy is it to find an in-house caregiver?
You're asking the wrong question. You should be saying, how tough is it? Linking into what you were saying there about the multi-generational, I've seen a seismic shift in other countries towards the US model, i.e. the absence of that multi-generational for various reasons. I think one big one is some notion of required wealth has two people working in the outside world, and that's not necessarily true, but that has a profound effect. And in the US in particular, people used to travel to new jobs every 3 to 4 years, and that had a real breakup effect. So the reality of your question is the marketplace treats caregivers as low income people, typically in the range of 15 plus or minus an hour is what the people get paid in the Austin area. And they also have to travel quite a bit either way. So the community is voting with its feet by treating them that way. And many times those people are, if they're working for agencies or direct, they're working typically 60, 80 hours a week. And to sort of try and have some semblance of the society that the TV tells them they should have, in other words, a nice car and look well, etc., etc. So I put it very crudely, I think it's broken.
Right. And I'm going to thank you for that perspective. Perspective is Peter's wife had a mega stroke 10 years ago. And so he's had lots of experience in that area. And of course, if next step would be assisted living, the concept that was developed in the 80s out in Oregon, the original thing with assisted living was to have a facility that allowed the independence and setting their own schedule of the people in the assisted living. That's pretty much changed, so you have to live by our schedule in most instances. And then, of course, the nursing home, and it's both old-fashioned as well as it's current. How does this statement strike you with regard to what you know about that? We, meaning our age, want autonomy for ourselves and safety for those we love. Do you see any at all tension between those two ideas? We'll come back to that as we go, but let's go on to slide 2, please, Tommy. But this is just meant as a brief thing, and I've gotten already a little behind. Tommy, are you trying to bring it up? There we go, perspective. What this is, Dr. Laura Carstensen is a sociology psychologist at Stanford. I won't go into her history, which is interestingly delineated in the book, but what we think about in terms of what's important to us, that is our family, our close, versus reaching out to go in other directions, really depends on what it says there. How we spend our time may depend as much on our perspective, depend on how much time we have or how much time we perceive ourselves to have. In other words, whether you're 30 years old and dying or 75 or have some life-limiting prognosis, then how you spend your time and with whom is really dependent on that, not so much on the fact that older versus younger. It is perspective, not age, that matters the most. How's that last statement grab you, folks? And I realize there's some unseniors here, but old age is a continuous series of losses. Your hearing, your vision, your balance, your ability to live alone, your ability to drive. Anybody identify with any of that who's watching? The other thing that is important is the trajectory of an illness. Cancer these days is often, fortunately, treated, but it will treat it, go into remission, and then come back. And many of the times when it does come back, we're ill prepared in a timeline to understand that this really is going to be a fatal illness. What about illnesses where death is imminent? Lou Gehrig's disease, which most of you know, is a progressive weakness of your respiratory muscles, so at some point you can't breathe at all, as opposed to some of the cancers that we have. And then there's the decisions you have to make about treatment for whatever it is, whether it's for dementia, whether it's lung disease, whether the obvious cancer, the benefits versus the ill effects, side effects. Should I have this back pain for my spinal stenosis at age 78? There's the pain that's there, but there's a huge block in surgery. So those are all decisions. And that's where what Gwande really's whole perspective is, that quality of life is more important than quantity of life. Let's go on to the next slide.
Tom, just a very quick one.
Sure.
So that last thing, old age is a continuous series of losses. A simple word in engineering is the word entropy, that things are a certain way and then they tend to fall apart, decay, etc. So one of the advantages of being connected to an extended community is that you see younger people go through a series of challenges, not quite at the same level as older people with their seriousness, but it's very serious for them. You have kids very young, continuously getting stuff. You have young families trying to cope and they're frazzled to hell. So if you're privileged to see into that extended family, it helps older people it helps me to put it into perspective.
No, that's a really good point to make. And I was looking for a quote we'll get to a little bit later, is that life is choices and they are relentless. It's just the severity and the extent of the choices, but life is choices and relentless, and you wisely point that out. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, I'm going to indict physicians a little bit here, if you'll let me. From the medical point of view, Gwande really overemphasizes the fact that physicians are aimed at disease control. That's what you hired them for, right? To control your disease. And they may or may not be focusing on the quality of life. That's easiest to illustrate, of course, when you're talking about cancer, because, hey, we want to control this disease. Here's another round of chemo. The last one didn't work, but this one ought to. Yeah, it'll make you a little sick, but the chances of response are at least 20%. Those are things that those of you who've had friends who've lived with these diseases have to face. So the medical view, though, is we're hired, and that's putting it rather grossly, but hired to control your disease. He characterizes three physician types in terms of you go to the physician, he says you've got X disease, here are your treatment options. And he illustrates that with his father's, who had a spinal cord tumor that was not curable. But number one is the paternalistic physician. Now, particularly those of you older do have some concept. The physician knows all. He's happy to tell you he knows all. And he or she will say these are your options and not necessarily take into consideration much of your story. But the paternalistic, that is fading in a general extent, although Beth may disagree. No, but the other, which I think is very common now, is called we'll term the information physician. So we've got paternalistic, now information. You need chemotherapy for X disease, and there happen to be several protocols. And this kind of physician just tells you all these 5 or 6, loses you in the name of the drugs. And you're saying, well, how am I supposed to make a decision which is best? Because the data is out there as to which is best, but which is the best for my particular disease. If I've already got a neuropathy and this chemotherapy enhances neuropathy, hey, that's probably not my best choice. Things like that. But the informational physician will do that. And that was illustrated well in the book. What we hope happens is called shared decision-making. And what that really means is that we will inform, we will listen to what your situation is, and then we will give you guidance. That's the real word. And as the middle panel says, from your physician, you want information and control of your destiny or of your choices, but you also want guidance. Now, back to that, whether you're in a nursing facility, whether you're temporarily in the hospital, or where you are, and I've already made mention of the fact that we all want autonomy, but we want safety. Can anybody give any illustrations between safety versus independence and autonomy in our living choices?
A friend of mine was in hospice. Clearly, she was in her 90s, and she said one day when I was visiting, and also her 3 sons were sitting across the room from her looking like 8-year-olds. And she said, I want chicken. And they're saying, but you can't swallow. And I said, we can get her chicken. We'll give her tiny, tiny little pieces. And she was very near death. And it was like, so what? Give her what she wants. It's not going to make any real difference in her life. And they absolutely could not see that because they were determined to keep her safe, as was the nursing staff of the nursing home.
No, you've chosen a perfect illustration, Donna, and that really is that. And I would obviously come down on the same side that you did, which is to say that if somebody wants to try it, okay. If those of you don't know, the magic doctor word is called aspirate. That is, goes down the wrong fluid into your lungs and can certainly bring on pneumonia. But putting in that perspective is so helpful. Now, if this patient that you just described for us aspirates, and she's then, let's say, either dies or admitted to the hospital with aspiration pneumonia, then the nursing facility gets a black mark, don't they?
Yeah.
It's just like if I want to get up and try to walk, and the nursing facility says, oh, you need to be tied in your wheelchair, and I get up and somehow fall, or let's make it even easier, not so much on the nursing, I'm out on my own with family and fall. Yes, I fell, and yes, as most of you are aware, a broken hip is catastrophic to folks as they get older. There's a 30% incidence, 30% mortality in the first year after somebody breaks a hip of all the population. So it's catastrophic, but the point is, back as Donna has nicely illustrated, if somebody certainly is advanced in their life cycle, paying attention to their choices, assuming they're made with some clearness of mind, is really, really important. What's the other biggie? I'm going to take away your keys. No, you're not. That's a real decision making. And that one, because it involves other people, i.e. running over somebody with the car, that's a little easier to enforce the other, but it still comes back to the dynamic tension to be made between independence and safety. Any other illustrations pop into anybody's mind?
I'd give a quick one with Elizabeth. So the lead in, I'm going away for a week, and I say, hey, I'm going to check out this retirement community where she goes for a week. And hey, we're real busy when we get there. We were going to put in where you're sort of independent. We're going to put you in the middle. And Elizabeth goes in, she's there like 30 seconds, and she gets a visceral reaction to the fact that the people were on conveyor belts and controlled. She could pick that up real fast. And so she has that makeup inside her that she wants to actualize her own life and not be on that conveyor belt. So at home, she walks, exercises 2 hours a day. She has a stroller. Her right arm is handicapped, so she would not be able to walk properly on the stroller, except that her husband has put a wraparound. So she's walking with the wraparound on her right hand and real good balance, keeping her leg in, etc. But if she falls, her hand is tied to that stroller, and she could have a more serious injury than she otherwise would have. And I have made that decision over time to encourage her to exercise in that way. In other words, the reward-risk ratio is very high towards reward.
Right. Thank you very much. And that's a real life illustration. Next slide, Tommy. Okay, I don't want to get behind and leave us a little bit of time. But these are the things, hard conversations. And Gawande makes that. He uses it as a physician, like somebody has a recurrent cancer and is worried about prognosis, or, hey, if we do this or don't that. And he has found that opening decisions are like, I am concerned, or as Beth may tell us a little bit about palliative care. But the point is, you have to have an intro. And so I am concerned is a good one. Even if it's, I am concerned about your ability to drive, or I am concerned or whatever, and that can. I've divided these into several hard conversations. One is directives. We all understand the concept of DNR. Generally, that applies in most instances out of the hospital. And if you feel strongly about it as a senior citizen, you need to tell somebody, i.e. your children. Now, guess what? They're not all going to agree with you. And they're not all even going to be remotely interested in talking about it. But it is important to specify that. Now, that doesn't mean if you fall at home, if you get dehydrated from diarrhea and faint and EMS comes, they're still, even if you have a DNR on the door, they're going to resuscitate you. DNR in this case really refers, not exclusively, but largely, if they find you in cardiac arrest, they're not going to start all those sort of things. Go back to the other one, please, Tommy. So that the idea of directive, the DNR, can you go to the fourth slide, please?
Yeah, sorry, I lost my place. I will pull that up again ASAP.
But those are the, oops. There we go. Tommy's doing this because I'm incapable of it, so don't hold her against anything kind of thing. Okay, so directives we've kind of talked about, and if you want to talk about them in the discussion, what? How about in life-threatening illness? That's where you really need to have concerns. And that's where we emphasize the point, and I would like you to be thinking about it as we get further into discussion. What is important to you? They tell the wonderful story in the book about a physician, an older parent who was in his 80s about to have a big back operation for his spinal stenosis, had made that decision. And his daughter, who happened to be, of course, a palliative care nurse, and said, what's important to you? In other words, because the risk of death was very real, what to do? And his answer was, as long as I can watch NFL football on Sunday afternoon and eat chocolate ice cream, keep me alive. But that's important, that be conveyed. What is important to you? I don't want to be a vegetable, but I do want to have some of these basic functions. And the other thing in talking to folks about that, and which that really means talking amongst ourselves, is what are your worries? What are your fears? It's said by many people, and many in our age, the idea of dying is not so terrifying. What is terrifying is what's going to happen just before I die. Am I going to have pain? Am I going to be short of breath? The aspect of it's just before. So that may be some of the things that come up in your worries and fears. And as I've already quoted, you make the decision about, yes, I don't want this done, or I do want this done. But choices don't stop, because there'll be a new situation. Well, they've got pneumonia. Should I do antibiotics at this point? It's just an illustration. So the choices don't stop, even though you've made some of the decisions, because, as I love their word, the choices are relentless. Next one, Tommy. Okay, let's assume that we're down to the aspect of some type of a terminal illness. If I use the word hospice, would most of you know what that means? Raise your hand if you can say what hospice actually does, but we're going to get some more detail. I'm going to guess that the vast majority of you do not know what means when somebody says palliative care. Well, the concept of hospice is living for the best possible day today, instead of sacrificing time now for time later. In other words, I'm going to take a treatment that has a minimal chance of success, is going to give me lots of side effects, potentially. And so do I go that route, or do I look and say, hey, let's live for the moment and design a program that will be helpful? One of the problems with saying, okay, I think it's time for hospice now, I'm speaking as the physician, is the patient sometimes says, don't give up on me. You're going to give up on me. My daughter-in-law, Beth McHorse, is a nurse. She recently worked at South Austin Medical Center as the palliative care nurse. And I've asked her to sort of clue in the rest of us clueless folks about what palliative care is all about, particularly as an outpatient, and what are the important things as you think about it. Beth?
Hello, thanks for letting me be here today. Often hospice and palliative care are used interchangeably, and that is in error. They are actually different. Hospice is really focusing on end-of-life care, and palliative care, there can be people who benefit from palliative care for 30 years. Palliative care recognizes that you have some condition that is going to give you symptoms, or that's going to impact your life in some way. And so palliative care works to manage those symptoms in a way that is suitable to you and maximizes your quality of life in the process. So there's a lot of conversation with palliative care in what matters to you. Okay, so you have this disease and these are the symptoms that are really bothersome to you. And we have these 3 medicines that can treat that disease. And here are the side effects of the medicines. And then a collaborative approach of, okay, well, let's try this medicine because I think I can deal with those side effects the best. And then that will treat the disease in a way that I'm comfortable with. So it's really a collaborative approach to managing symptoms of, even it could be aging, what is happening as you're getting older, and how can we deal with those things in a way that you can still have the quality of life that you want, or the closest thing to that you want.
Right.
More.
That sounds really good. Let's raise a couple of questions and then we'll get into some discussions. But Beth, or anybody who's been close to it, what is lost by signing on to hospice? So you have advanced disease at some stage that you know is not going to be cured. What is lost? And I would answer that question by saying, make sure that the patient understands that they're not being abandoned. Because in reality with hospice, as Beth emphasized, you're actually improving the quality of life. In Gawande's book, his father came to the need for hospice. And by arranging his medicines better, by helping him understand, by letting him keep a log, his quality of life, he was alert more of the time, he was having less pain more of the time. So a lot of good things happen by that fact. What was lost, of course, is the realization, and that's harder in some people than others, that, hey, we're not talking about cure, we're talking about it. And that's often a problem when you have a remission of a cancer and nothing else is really going to help it.
And one way that we describe that with patients is it's really a shift in focus of care. It's not that your doctor is going to say, okay, well, I don't need to pay attention to that patient anymore. It's really changing the conversation to, we want to, as Tom already referenced, we want to change the conversation of how are we going to cure this disease to how are we going to make you comfortable during the rest of the time that you have and make you be able to live in a way that you are happy with for as long as possible.
Hope that sort of explanation makes some sense to you. And there are all sorts of ongoing illustrations. The book, which again, I would highly recommend, Being Mortal by Gawande, is well worth reading because he talks about the whole system. Since this is something called Capital City Village, and many of you are aware of it, but not all, the concept of staying at home, because our motto is basically to live well at home and to live safely at home. But a key concept that emerges from Dr. Gwande's interviews is home. Much more than just the place where you go to bed at night, home evokes a set of values and freedoms for many as they face old age. As you consider the life you want to lead in old age, what does home mean to you? And I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I think we've all thought about issues enough. So is anybody willing to share? What does the concept of home mean to you? Why do we make such a big deal about staying at home?
Independence.
And familiar.
Familiar, independence. Tommy, why don't you get rid of the slide now? We'll just go to the full screen. Okay, independence, excuse me. Familiarity. Any other words pop into your mind?
Making your own decisions.
Yes, you're making your own decisions, and a point that comes up repeatedly in the article is making those decisions and on your own schedule. In other words, if you want to sleep till 9 o'clock and stay up on the internet till 1, that's your business. That's not anybody else's. Whereas if you're in a nursing facility, for instance, lights go out at 9:30 and they bring around morning meds at 6 a.m. and have your temperature checked, whether you want it done or not. But any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think, Tom, there's a big elephant in the room with the passing of extended families. And that is a lot of the good stuff that was spoken here needs one-on-one from highly skilled people to get what's inside people or what should be inside them, because a lot of us are conditioned by modern psychology, marketing, TV ads, etc. So the actual cost of this one-on-one is enormous. And I've been grappling since I joined Capital City Village to see if there was any way that there could be a multiplication effect. In other words, that one person with some wisdom could be helping multiple people at the same time. Because the one-on-one cost, I don't think is sustainable by any country anymore.
No, your point is well taken. Peter speaks broadly from, how long have you been in the US? And he started life in Ireland.
Gosh, 40 years.
Okay, well, you're 3/4 American then, whether you want to be or not. Okay, no, that's a very good point. Capital City Village, well, hospice does have hospice volunteers, and elaborate a little bit to that, who come and visit with people for extended and more of that one-on-one that you just talked about. Capital City Village has a program called Village Connections, that it's not the extent that Peter's really talking about, but it's a chance to be one-on-one with people in the setting that can be hopefully very positive for both individuals involved.
I had hospice for my sister. I'm from a family, 4 boys and 2 girls. And my sister
He's 90.
had bone cancer and she was dying. And in fact, she wanted me to take her to Oregon so she could have a doctor-assisted suicide. But anyhow, one of the things, hospice was helpful, but when we were in Buckner and she was pretty close to dying, there was a little bit of a conflict between the hospice nurse and the nurses there at Buckner and relative to her care. And so I'm not sure exactly how that be overcome. One of my friends went to stay in hospice, but she suffered greatly. And another factor in her last hours was that she was suffering pain, and no matter what the doctor that was taking care of that portion of her care, she could not overcome the pain with medication. So, and another thing that apart from this is that I had to make the decision on 2 of my siblings and my mother to pull the plug, so to speak. And so there's a lot of factors here relative to the human aspect of it that you don't know you're going to face, and you have to face at one time or another as a family member.
That's a good point, and it would bring up that everybody, in my opinion, needs an advocate. Sometimes that's your spouse, sometimes that's one of your children, sometimes that's your best friend. But you need it for 2 ways. One is just to pay attention to what's happening in the world. But there was a good story in Gawande's book about a young woman in her 30s who had metastatic lung cancer, non-smoker lung cancer, and naturally, and had a newborn baby, just to make it more gripping. Went through a number of chemotherapies and with some modest success, but really most of the symptoms, shortness of breath, fluid, pain, all came roaring back. So she had made the decision that, no more treatment. We've done what else, whatever. But yet, as she got more short of breath or whatever, immediately EMS was called and raced her to the ER. Fortunately, her primary care doctor was there to intervene and say, we don't want this person, there's no reason to put her on life support. I mean, life is ebbing quickly. That's a pretty dramatic thing. But in the world where your primary care doctor doesn't know you as well, or certainly doesn't have any influence, you have to make sure that you have made very clear in these discussions, those hard discussions that I mentioned, that what your wishes are, and there's somebody around, again, be it a neighbor, but who has some legal authority to also, one is to intervene, but 2, if you're really trying to control, get the nurses to give more pain medicine or get whatever, you have to have some legal authority. How hard is it, Beth, to get a power of attorney?
So it's not hard to get a medical power of attorney. There are actually forms online that you can, complete and then just have them notarized. And often people will identify two, like a medical power of attorney and then a backup or power of attorney. Sometimes that works well, sometimes it doesn't, depending on if they agree with what you've said or not. But it's important to have that in place, because that's one of the first things that if you were admitted to the hospital that they're going to ask is, do you have a medical power of attorney? And in addition to that document, to have shared your wishes with that person or people. And they are hard conversations, and that is okay. There are some resources that I can share with Tom that he could share with you that help with those conversations if you're nervous about having them. But some of the things to think about are, if you got to a point where you would need a feeding tube to live, is that something you would want? Or, would it be okay if it was a short-term solution and then you could get off of it, or would you not want that at all? Same goes for like life support or intubation, which is when a tube goes down your throat and a machine breathes for you. Is that something that you would be willing to tolerate, long term or short term, if your prognosis is depending upon prognosis? All of those things are good things to think about when not just having the medical power of attorney, but also making sure they know what your wishes are. Also, it's a good idea to write that stuff down and just keep it, with that document. These are things that I am willing, and and put it in writing, sign your name to it. It's just another help for those people who have to help make those decisions if the time comes.
And
Could I mention?
Overemphasize sorry, Donna, you go first.
Well, I just wanted to mention a resource for doing exactly, and I'm blanking your name, just talked about. And I don't know if y'all are familiar with the organization in Austin called Funeral Consumers Alliance of Central Texas. Used to be known as AMBUS, but they have a document on their website, and I'm not, well, I think it's a good organization, but it isn't that I'm trying to promote them. On their website, they have medical power of attorney, all those end of life documents, but they have a supplemental document that is wonderful for helping you talk about what if this, what if that, what if this. And it's basically a check sheet that said, if my current situation, my current health situation is this, and this happens to me, this is what I want you to do. And certainly your choices would be very different if, as we've talked about, you're very near death and you are. But anyway, their website is Funeral Consumers Alliance, FCA, CTX, centraltexas.org. And all that stuff is available at no cost.
And I would reemphasize, you don't have to be significantly ill to need a medical power of attorney assigned to somebody. Because
this is a supplement for it.
Right. And those are important in any discussion, but
Right.
Because you can, you could fall and hit your head and not be able to manage your own affairs, which of course brings Dr. McHorse to his favorite topic. Be sure and in your billfold and on your cell phone, both, have a list of your medicines and drug allergies.
Here's the reality check to what we're talking about. I think the concept of a mentor, especially a wise one, that you're on the same page with in advance is crucial. And I often wondered whether CCV could perhaps step into that vacuum. But here's a real example. A year ago, Elizabeth has a collection of symptoms, and it's Monday of a bank holiday weekend, 2 a.m. in the morning, and I say, hey, this has gone above my pay grade. I tried to get a nurse on the phone, can't. So I call out an ambulance to check. So first reality check, I say, hey, we have our documentation over here at the fridge. Do you want to have a look at it? No, we don't need that. So they say, hey, she needs to go to the hospital. So we get to the hospital, Seaton, and they do a series of tests, and you have to go to the emergency ward. There's no intermediate. So into the emergency ward, and they carry out a series of tests. And it's a quiet night, and they say it'll take about an hour to get the results back. 15 minutes later, the doctor comes up and he says, hey, with Elizabeth's stroke 10 years ago, I think I'm going to admit her into hospital and have a neurologist look at her. And I say, well, can we not just wait for 30 minutes and get the results? And he said, well, if you're not going to listen to me, what the heck are you doing here? So this is where Peter Brady, the advocate, kicks in. I say, hey, hold on a sec. Let me take out the tape recorder. And I press a hypothetical button. I say, a patient said to doctor, let's wait for the test. Doctor says, what the heck are you doing? And he actually recoiled back and he said, I am so sorry. In other words, later on, I hear he's 23 hours on the job, and he's either under pressure to get people into hospital beds, or he's just spaced out from exhaustion.
Right. That's
this is Cynthia.
Yeah.
You're my new hero. That is a wonderful, wonderful story. Thank you. Very helpful.
As we kind of get close to the hour, Shubhda, are you still there, or either any one of you from a different cultural perspective want to add anything as we kind of wrap up?
Thank you so much. This has been a really wonderful discussion. I've been listening in. I even tested this out with my dad to see if he was, he could understand it, and he did. So, no, this is a conversation that we're all having. In fact, we've done some research on the South Asian Indian population here in Austin to see, if they would be willing to say what their preferences were. The cultural perspective, a lot of times it comes out where people don't want to have this conversation because they're like, oh, my mom, for example, she says, yeah, you're there to take care of me and you make the decisions. I trust you, right? And I'm like, but what do you want? You have to tell me. And she goes, no, whatever you want is what we want. So that's where we kind of end up. But the laws are where you cannot just make those decisions. And it's a tough one. I mean, I had to take guardianship of my mother-in-law. And that is also very tough because, at what point do you say this person is not in a place to make their own decisions and take that over? So it's a very, very tough conversation. We've been having it with several families, and I appreciate, you taking the time, and Dr. Atul Gawande also, writing it down so we can all have the conversation. So, yeah, I mean, even within my own family, we're having a tough time. So culturally, it is even more difficult within Asian families because sometimes they say, no, that's not a conversation that we should have, right? Because then your intention becomes reality. So you don't want to even intend that this will happen. So
as you may know, that's not confined just to Asian families.
Right.
I know, but but I think people are more open to having these conversations. They do understand that whether the documentation gets completed or not, I think the conversation is critical within the families. And in our research, we found out that community initiated is better than family initiated, right? Like that is something, maybe it's culturally a little different or not, but they said that we'd like somebody else to bring this conversation into our family situation.
I think you really bring up a good point to at least start the conversation, even if it does. Tommy, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, quickly. And I don't want to put Shubhda on the spot, but I am curious because I think you make an excellent point here that community initiated conversations or discussion is sometimes more welcome than family initiated. And I'm wondering, do you think that, because I know most of the folks affiliated with SEVA have intergenerational households. And I'm wondering, do you think that type of household makes it harder or easier to have those really necessary conversations?
In a sense, a lot of the people who've grown older in this country, I found already have had this conversation and they've initiated these documents, which is good. But as you said, Seva is served by people who've come or immigrated at a later age. And those people are, first of all, they don't understand, like, why do we have to have the conversation? And once we do, you tell me where to sign and I'll sign it. We're like, no, you're supposed to tell me, right? That part is where it becomes a lot harder. And culturally, there's so many nuances to it that just putting a piece of paper in front of them and saying, hey, do you want artificial respiration or, whatever, right? It doesn't work like that. So it's just a matter of trust that's built up, and the trust is there in the intergenerational family. So they hand it over, but them designating who should be the one taking care of you, that is a very much more important thing than how the care needs to be taken care, done. So that who is what we're trying to focus on, trying to see if we can get everybody to complete that medical power of attorney. And then if needed, the out of hospital DNR or something like that, because the living will becomes a much harder proposition here. That's what my personal experience has been. Megha, if you can, talk a little bit more, anybody else too, what's been their conversation within their families.
Well, this is the 2010 census, much less the 2020, but in 2010, 22% of the population of Austin was born outside the US, just to reemphasize the cultural aspects. And I'm sure it's at least 15%, if not higher, with the 2020 census. So other questions? I think we have time for one or two. We promised you not to put you into sleep mode, interfere with anybody's evening. Somebody raised their hand, but I can't tell. Just go ahead and speak up, Marie.
Well, that vial of life thing is a good way to start the conversation. And my daughter filled it out and we put the notice on the door, and she put a bright pink thing and put it on my freezer. And when the emergency guys came in, it told them where to go, and everything was in there, including the medical power of attorney. And my family and I had talked about what I wanted, what I didn't want. And it was real simple. And we got to the hospital and they lost the pink folder. So we have to do that all over again. My son-in-law just brought the new one today.
Yeah, and for those of you participating, I also did put a link for the Vial of Life in the chat section. So if you need a direct link for that resource, as well as several others, it's in the chat section.
Well, you all have been a wonderful audience, responsive. Maybe it is a little bit personal since we are talking about matters of life and death. But if you have other questions, send them to CCB or Tommy, and maybe I can answer them, or I can get the right person more likely to answer them if some questions come up.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Tom and Pam and Tommy. It was very enlightening.
This is Sam. I do have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned about going to a doctor about geriatric. Did I hear that correctly? As far as, okay, about going out to someone instead of your family practitioner to find out exactly what limitations you truly have, and to get recommendations either to travel or not travel.
Well, I don't know. The geriatric physician really, in most instances, would become your primary care doctor, because if you need that. But there is a list that I can give you. They're listed in the phone book, but like a lot of things, not everybody in the phone book's of equal ability and quality. But the answer to your real question takes, like travel, takes more than just one 15-minute office visit. But yes, a geriatric specialist would be the person to give you an overall view of that. And they can supplement your primary care doctor, but they often become your primary care doctor.
If you have a condition like
No,
Right. Again, those are all go into it, both the condition, the medicines, the type of travel, the stress of the travel, the safety, all of those would have to be taken into consideration, but that would be the right person to be seeing.
Thank you.
All right, well, folks, if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up. But Tom, thank you so much. Really appreciate the help today, and the Peter as well, and Shubhita, thank you for chiming in as well. So I really do appreciate the time that everybody has given us. And if there are follow-up questions, if you missed something, please do contact us through the Capital City Village office. But this is a great program, and I really appreciate the time and attention to it. Please do refer to our calendar section on our website. We do have some other really good programs coming up in July, and we'd love for you to join us again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. And Tom, really, thank you. This is a great, it's a great way to have this discussion, and it's so necessary.
CCB, one suggestion. I think this is a great topic to get past what I call the polite talk. So I would suggest you consider having it maybe once every year or every 6 months or something. Something along this very meaningful topic like mortality that would enable people just to see what others are going through and to get some pointers as to what might help them.
Good
Yeah,
point.
I agree, Peter. Yeah, I agree. I think it's something that we should do regularly and just include as many people in the conversation as possible.
Very good. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Have a good Sunday.